The snow fell steadily that December evening, each flake catching the glow of the streetlights like tiny stars finding their way to Earth. Margaret Walsh pulled her worn coat tighter around herself and the sleeping baby in her arms. Little Emma was barely 3 months old, and tonight they had nowhere to go. Margaret's nursing shift at St. Mary's Hospital had ended at midnight. She'd worked a double, trying to earn enough to keep their small apartment. But the eviction notice had been final. 3 days to vacate, and despite her best efforts, despite working every extra hour she could manage, it hadn't been enough. Now she sat at the bus stop on Fifth Avenue, watching the last bus of the night disappear into the snowy darkness. The next one wouldn't come until morning. She looked down at Emma's peaceful face. Her daughter's tiny fingers curled against the thin blanket. How had it come to this? At 32, Margaret had thought she had it all figured out. A steady job as a registered nurse, a loving husband, plans for the future. But David had left when she was 6 months pregnant, taking their savings and leaving only a note about needing to find himself. The medical bills from Emma's difficult birth had consumed what little remained. 3 blocks away, Thomas Sterling was working late again in his corner office. The city spread out below him like a tapestry of lights. At 58, he'd built Sterling and Associates from nothing into one of the city's most successful consulting firms. The numbers on his computer screen blurred slightly, another 16-hour day taking its toll. Thomas removed his reading glasses and rubbed his tired eyes. The office was empty, had been for hours. His secretary Carol often joked that he lived there. She wasn't far wrong. His penthouse apartment felt more like a hotel room than a home. 23 floors of success, but somehow still hollow. He gathered his things slowly, in no hurry to return to that emptiness. Outside, the snow was falling heavier now. Thomas had grown up in winters like this, in a small town in Ohio where neighbors looked out for each other. Before the business consumed everything, before success became his only companion. Walking to his car, Thomas noticed her immediately. A young woman sitting alone at the bus stop, holding what looked like a baby. She wasn't dressed for this weather. Her light coat was meant for autumn, not a December blizzard. Something stirred in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. He slowed his steps, watching. She shifted the baby to one arm and checked her phone with shaking fingers. The worry in her posture was unmistakable. Thomas found himself crossing the street before he'd consciously decided to do so. "Excuse me," he said gently, his voice carrying the authority of years in boardrooms, but softened by genuine concern. "Are you all right?" Margaret looked up, startled. The man standing before her was tall and distinguished, salt and pepper hair slightly damp from the snow, wearing an expensive wool coat. His eyes were kind, though, and that surprised her. "I'm fine," she said automatically, then felt Emma stir in her arms. The lie seemed foolish in the face of obvious evidence to the contrary. "The buses have stopped running," Thomas said quietly. "This storm. They announced it on the radio 20 minutes ago. Nothing until morning." Margaret's face crumpled slightly before she caught herself. She'd been holding it together for so long, being strong for Emma, but this stranger's kindness threatened to break through her carefully maintained composure. "I see," she whispered, looking down at her sleeping daughter. We'll figure something out." Thomas studied her face in the streetlight. She was young, probably in her 30s, with tired eyes that spoke of someone who'd been carrying too much for too long. The baby couldn't be more than a few months old. His businessman's mind calculated the situation quickly, but his heart was already 3 steps ahead. "My name is Thomas," he said, crouching down slightly so they were at eye level. "And I have a warm car, and a guest room that hasn't been used in months." Margaret's eyes widened. Every instinct told her to be cautious, to decline. But Emma chose that moment to wake, letting out a small cry that seemed impossibly loud in the snowy silence. "I don't accept charity," Margaret said softly, but there was uncertainty in her voice now. "It's not charity," Thomas replied, standing slowly. "It's just one human being helping another, the way things used to be when I was growing up." There was something in his voice, a loneliness that matched her own, that made Margaret look at him differently. This wasn't pity. This was recognition. One person seeing another's need and responding from the heart. "I'm Margaret," she said finally, "and this is Emma." "Hello, Emma," Thomas said softly, and the baby seemed to study his face with those serious eyes that newborns have. "Would you both like to come home with me? Just for tonight. Until you can sort things out." Margaret felt tears threatening again. When was the last time someone had offered help without wanting something in return? When had anyone seen her as more than just another struggling single mother? "Okay," she whispered. "Just for tonight." Thomas's car was warm and smelled faintly of leather and coffee. As they drove through the quiet streets, Margaret found herself talking. About the hospital. About Emma. About how everything had fallen apart so quickly. Thomas listened without judgment, asking gentle questions, sharing bits of his own story. His house was more beautiful than Margaret had imagined, but not ostentatious. Comfortable, lived in, despite what he'd said about being there rarely. He showed her to a guest room with an adjoining. "There's soup on the stove," he said from the doorway, "and the refrigerator is well stocked. Please, make yourselves at home." That night, for the first time in months, Margaret slept peacefully. Emma was warm and fed, and for these few hours at least, they were safe. In the morning, Thomas had coffee ready and was scrambling eggs when Margaret appeared in the kitchen, Emma gurgling contentedly in her arms. "You didn't have to," she began. "I wanted to," he said simply. "I can't remember the last time I cooked breakfast for someone." Over coffee, they talked more. Thomas learned about Margaret's nursing career, her dedication to helping others even as her own world crumbled. Margaret discovered that beneath the successful businessman was someone who'd lost touch with what truly mattered. Someone who'd achieved everything he thought he wanted but found it lacking. "I have a proposition," Thomas said carefully as breakfast wound down. "My housekeeper, Mrs. Patterson, she's been asking about retiring. The house feels too big, too empty. What if you stayed on? Help with the household? Bring some life back to this place?" Margaret set down her coffee cup slowly. "Thomas, I can't let you—" "You'd be helping me," he said earnestly. "More than you know. And Emma would be safe, warm. You could work part-time at the hospital if you wanted. Follow your calling without worrying about keeping the lights on." 6 months later, the house on Maple Street had transformed into something neither of them had expected: a home. Margaret's nursing scrubs hung in the laundry room next to Thomas's business shirts. Emma's toys were scattered across the living room floor. The kitchen smelled of family dinners instead of takeout containers. Thomas found himself leaving the office earlier, eager to hear about Margaret's day at the hospital, to hold Emma while Margaret prepared dinner. The little girl had learned to smile, and her favorite person to smile at was the distinguished gentleman who read her bedtime stories in a voice soft with wonder. Margaret watched Thomas discover joy again, saw him remember what it meant to be part of something larger than profit margins and quarterly reports, and she found herself believing again in second chances, in the kindness of strangers who become family, in the possibility that sometimes, when everything falls apart, it's just making room for something better to grow. On snowy evenings, when Thomas came home to find Margaret reading in the living room chair while Emma played on the floor nearby, he remembered that December night at the bus stop, how a moment of human kindness had saved them all, in ways none of them could have imagined, because sometimes the greatest successes aren't measured in bank accounts or corner offices, but in the quiet moments when strangers become family, and empty houses become homes filled with love.